Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. I guess you probably already noticed. That's not working well at all. Sorry. This is where we are anyway. I guess you all noticed by now. So, the name's Michael. That's my email address if you have any questions. So, I came here from the beautiful city of Stockholm, where it's currently snowing. I lived there for about 1.5 years. I'm actually originally from there, but I moved down to the southern parts of Sweden, where it's also snowing, in order to study. That's typically like one day in the middle of summer, but not quite. And now it's actually a beautiful city. And I work with Android, and that means running around with lots of tools and breaking things. Anyway, and I've been at Spotify for about 1.5 years. And I came from Spotify from a small startup in Lund in southern Sweden, and I used to work at Ericsson, which is a really, really big company, which is really horrible. So I'm going to start off with a talk called Fun with Fragments. I hope you'll be able to read everything. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't done it in Prezi before. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about another topic, which is also about how we scale stuff here in Spotify. So, a fragment in Android. The developer's guide in Android. I don't know how many of you here are Android developers, but what they say is that a fragment represents a behavior or a portion of user interface in an activity. That doesn't really say that much, but it's what they do. So fragments are small parts of an activity. They are like bits of user interface. So they usually have a view attached to them, and they have their own life cycles, and they can save and restore state automatically, or not so automatically as the case may be. And you can easily hook into what they call the backstack for nice transitions and stuff like that. Stuff like we don't typically do at Spotify because low-end phones they just don't like it at all. And they're available from level 4, API level 4, if you use the support library. And you can usually use them for modularizing stuff and reusing UI, which is nice. And you can reuse and modularize behavior, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. And you can hook into the lifecycle of an activity, which is probably not something they normally talk about. And it's instead of switching between activities when you're on tablets and stuff like that. And of course, you can use them with view pagers, but that's not really that interesting. So that's basically what a fragment is. Okay, so our app is built more like a browser than most music apps, basically because we use the SPURL stuff that they were talking about earlier. And our user interface relies really heavily on fragments. So our navigation and player bars, all of these things are fragments. In fact, most of the app is actually fragments. And we do it partly because splitting logic into multiple fragments makes it a lot easier for multiple developers to work on the code simultaneously. We're not that many Android developers at Spotify, but still, as we were talking about earlier, single responsibility principles and the coupling shit is really nice. All right, so I'm guessing this is the question no one's really asking. Where are our fragments in the Android app? Well, we have this totally random white guy, Josh Groban, and we put a fragment in his chin. No, but the entire page is a fragment. And then we have this thing down below here, the player bar, which is also a fragment. And of course our activity bar, action bar is also a fragment. And you see this nice, beautiful view picture of the biography and related doors and stuff like that. So some of you might be thinking, hang on, that's a view pager, and you said everything is a fragment. Did we put fragments in fragments? And the question is, the answer is, yeah, we did. And then it broke. It broke real bad. Because, Google, they went and thought, yeah, fragments, that's cool. But don't let people put fragments in fragments, because why would you want to do that? Well, I can think of lots of good reasons. Anyway, it doesn't work, it broke. Or it didn't used to work. So, we had to build something else called the page. And the idea is pretty much the same as fragments. It works in many of the same ways. It has a very, very, very basic life cycle because we don't need most of the stuff that fragments are able to do. So pretty much save and restore state, inflate views, and of course we have a life cycle that's on appear and on disappear. It does very little, but it looks pretty. So we don't actually put fragments in fragments. It just looks like we do, it behaves like we do, and it actually works apart, which is different from what fragments used to be. Fortunately, Google at some point realized that, wow, we were stupid, we shouldn't do that. So you can use fragments and fragments, but we haven't switched over for various reasons. One of them was being a little bit lazy and having lots to do. So we still use Page for now. And it should be really easy to transition at some point because all of the functionality is entirely decoupled from the fragment. So at some point we can just rewrite them as fragments very easily, or just stick them in a new fragment. It doesn't really matter that much. All right. So that's a little about it. Let's look at a code sample that I hope you guys will be able to read. So fragments are cool, but you can use them without views. So let's build a fragment that acts as a headset detector. Pardon me. All right. Totally unreadable code. Awesome. So we have here a fragment called a headset detector fragment. And what we do is we stick a broadcast receiver. That's something that is able to get broadcasts from the system in it. And we just implement a really simple method that listens to headsets. Nothing strange, nothing super. The headset changes. And then we register it in the fragments on create and on destroy methods. So pretty much what we have is a fragment that has a broadcast receiver and is able to register and unregister from it automatically. Not super interesting so far. But what we do is we put it in a headset activity, or something we call headset activity, a fragment activity. And what we do is we just add it here with a 0 for the view, and then it's viewless. So whenever this activity is created or destroyed, we automatically get a broadcast receiver where the life cycle is handled, and we don't have to think about it. And the really nice part is that it's perfectly reusable. So talking about fragments, yeah, it's really, really easy to lose fragments if you're not careful. Because on state restore and fragments, every single field in that fragment might be reset. It doesn't have to be reset, it depends on the state of the app, right? But it could be reset. And it's kind of easy to handle for things that are parcelable. Unfortunately, fragments really aren't parcelable. They're big, complex, chunky things that nobody wants to interact with in that way. So one way to do it is to use set retain instance to true. But I mean, if you lose the instance of that fragment or you do other silly things, you end up with really, really hard to find memory leaks. We did this, don't do it. It's stupid. So instead, we can use these nice helper functions called setTargetFragment and getTargetFragment. They are super nice. So we're revisiting the unreadable headset detector listener again. Now we've introduced a small interface called the headset detector listener, which is super, super trivial. And then we go ahead and get the target fragment and receive, check that we actually have one, and then just dispatch a change update on headset change call. And that's the whole change. We now have a way of getting the target fragment from inside of it here, wherever what we're talking to. We don't have to care about what it is, we just care about whether or not it implements this interface. So pretty nicely decoupled. Could be better, but pretty nicely. And then we have a headset activity, which is, well, the same headset activity. What we've done is we've added a headset display fragment that just shows this, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter wherever it is. Then we add set target fragment to this so that we get updates into this fragment. And then we add it to the same, in the same transaction, we just added to the headset activity. So what we've got now, is an activity that actually allows you to listen to and display updates without having to do anything more than just adding a few fragments in a transaction. You don't have to think about life cycles. You don't have to think about anything. It just does it, all of its own. It's really, really nice. Okay, life cycles. We found this cool trick when we were looking at code from the NFC adapter. And a fragment's life cycle is, funnily enough, always shorter than its activity. Not so strange. And the fragment is also restored when you start that activity again. And this is kind of nice, and it's maybe a little bit obvious, but if you add a fragment to an activity, you get lifecycle callbacks when the activity does, and you can react to them. That means you've got a spy for your activity, which is of course why they intended. So, say you want to log every single entrance into an activity or any sort of view, really. Say maybe you want to send it to your backend or whoever. So you do something like this. You create your viewlogger fragment. You save the name you want to log from, like who it is, what view you're logging in, whatever. And then you just do simple stuff like this. This is stupid, of course, but I mean, if you want to send it to your backend, this would be a good place to do it. Maybe not in some sort of synchronous task thing or whatever. Async is really bad change, but anyway. You get your arguments and you just log it in OnResume and OnPause, for example, or whatever lifecycle part you're listening to. And then, wherever you want to use it, you just add it into a transaction again, a viewless transaction again, and all of a sudden you have a fragment that does logging of your activity. Whenever this activity is reinstantiated or resumed and paused and stuff like that, you get a log. So that's pretty much every time someone enters that view, that will show there will be a log for it, which can be useful if you're into that sort of thing. So we started logging every time, and that's it. We don't have to do anything, and we can reuse it. We can put this in every single activity we want to put it in. Okay. So, enough about fragments. They're interesting, but not that interesting. So I'm going to talk a little bit how we work with long-lived features in the Android project. Or rather, we didn't know how to do it either, because it was a mess. So, you know this, companies grow, and then you get scaling issues. When companies become bigger, they get slower, right? And at Spotify, we used to have some problems with that. I think most of us here think that we are solving most of them, one at a time. It's actually going a lot better than I was hoping for. And we're doing it partly by clever architecture, and of course partly by some black magic. You know, the normal way, but mostly we do it by the most dark and horrible magic of all, talking to other people. It's really nice. We had our fair share of problems in Android in our squad. That's what we call teams, because we can't use normal words for things. And we have this one team. We used to be the one team. We used to service all of the needs for Android stuff in all of Spotify. If we needed something in an app, if we had to have a new feature, we were the guys who were making it. And we are, at the time we were like 6 developers maybe, I don't know. We're a few more now, but anyway. And it was really easy when we were small. It was not a problem. But then the feature set expanded and the platform set expanded and everything, and we became more and more people. It started getting a little bit harder, as in we weren't coping that well. And that's the really cool part of working here. Because when things get hard, instead of giving up and just throwing our hands in the air, we actually solve this sort of shit. Pardon my French. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did wrong and how we sort of tried fixing it and where we're going. So the basic problem is that there's a lot of people in the company, or semi-lot, or whatever you want to call it. Quite a lot of people, and everyone's asking for new features. There's going to be problems to get anything done because everyone's clamoring for attention. And you know, give me my new stuff. I need this out by Friday. Well, I guess you all have heard this at some point. And when it's really hard to get stuff done, you become slow. And when you become slow, you know, changing priorities like you have to do when you're a fairly agile company, or try to be a fairly agile company, it's starting to hurt, and it starts killing code. Stuff that's partly finished or not really finished, or actually finished but no one to deliver to, that sort of thing. And this is sort of the situation you end up in. Everyone talking at the same time. I don't know if you've heard about the Dunbar number, or Dunbar's number. I guess you have. So it sort of says that there's a limit to the amount of people that you can actually have useful relationships with, stable social relationships with, as in you can't know that many people. And when you start not knowing people, you don't know who to go to, and that sort of thing. It limits the efficiency of communication anyway. And Dunbar said about 100 people or so. Some later people say 150 to 100, 300, but I think 100 is probably pretty close to it. So we started splitting the company up into bits and pieces, not really, but grouping it on location and common missions. People who work with roughly the same sort of things are grouped into what we call a tribe. And people who are in the same office are typically located in the same tribe. And we call those tribes, as I said. And yes, we game way too much. We have squads, we have tribes, we have chapters, we have guilds. All of these things are way too game inspired, but it sort of actually works. They're really awesome. And you don't notice it at first, because it's subtle as hell. But they give us peace and quiet and focus, because it allows the right people to talk to the right people. We focus on the right things. We share focus, we share missions and stuff like that. And a lot of the jammer and non-essential stuff that goes out on all the mailing lists is just cut away. It made us a lot more focused. But when we got focused and got peace and quiet, we actually noticed we weren't delivering fast enough. At least not as fast as we wanted to be. In our feature squads, the guys who were building stuff, as you heard about earlier, building new features, they couldn't release because our development branch was just not releasable. It was, oh yeah, it wasn't nice. Because we've been dealing with this priority shift stuff for a long time. And we had the same issue as well because we were branching off of it all the time, of our one stable release branch, you know, really bad situation. And of course, that made future branches die. Not really very nice, but they did. They did. They were waiting for better days, so were we. And feature branches from other teams started diverging. You know, you're in a sense, I mean, it was really, really difficult to merge them. And it wasn't very nice. We weren't getting stuff out. You know, have you ever been at a company like that? Nah, sorry. But have you ever been in that situation? It's like this. It's not nice. Not the good part about Spotify is that we needed to do something about it, and fast. But what were we going to do? Well, a lot of this is probably pretty straightforward and simple, but these are the 5 major steps that we took to get it working again and remove this crap. So we started controlling the pace of cross-platform shared code. We heard about our cross-platform shared code. It used to change a lot. It was coupled to our desktop client. So no longer is, and we didn't slow down at all. We just made the pace controlled, so we have a release cycle for it, and we made it predictable. And we made sure that whenever something actually is a breaking change, when we change the API, someone tells us, which is nice, right? Straightforward enough. And we started sticking to a release scheme and a release rule set. So if it's ready, then it goes into the next release. If it's not, it doesn't. Straightforward enough. And we totally stole this from the iOS guys. But it makes it much, much more likely that we can actually release on a given day. So when that release day comes, we can actually get something out the door. Right. And we were often on release branches. Feature branches, and never really integrating that well. So we started integrating using release flags. If your first commit for every feature is a release flag for that feature, you get a lot of more leverage. You can do a lot of stuff, more stuff than you could do otherwise. For example, you have control of your situation. You can turn it off, you can turn it on. Pretty straightforward stuff. You can integrate whenever you want because you have a flag that allows you to turn it off. And hey, you get gradual rollouts, that's nice. And you also get easier A/B testing, as we've already seen from the iPhone app. And as another nice bonus is that you don't get to stay on feature branches. When you have feature flags, it's really easy to stay on a feature branch. It's nice, it's comfortable. You've been there for a long time. You feel at home in the feature branch. Don't do that. Instead, just build small new increments of minimum, yeah, they always say minimum viable product, but the smallest increment that you can build, and then kill your feature branch. Don't stay on it. Avoid all of that merge hassle. Just get it out the door. And of course, you don't have to roll out because we have a feature flag there. Very straightforward stuff. And of course, we want more tests because when you have a lot of squads who are working on the same stuff, we have a lot of teams working on the same stuff, it requires a lot of coordination. And coordination comes in many flavors. But one of them is fact-checking or testing or whatever you want to call it. And one way of distributing it is to make sure that every other squad has to do testing. Well, once again, pretty straightforward, but more unit tests, more graph traversals, acceptance tests, all of this. If there aren't any, the feature doesn't get to go in. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah. But anyway, combining all of this and being really strict about it allows us to do a lot more, and it helps us do our new job as a container squad, which is make sure that all of the other teams at Spotify make our app awesome, building new features. So we weren't delivering, or we were feeling really bad about it. And now we deliver every few weeks, just like the iOS guys do. And we are getting shit done. It's a lot easier than it was before, and it's fun. I mean, now it's really fun again. I'm actually happier about working at Spotify than I've been for a long time. It was declining, and then all of a sudden in my squad, the entire company wasn't for sure, but my squad, the work was getting slower and slower, and now we've gotten to a place where we're actually moving a lot faster than we've ever been. When other companies start growing slower and slower when they add more people, we're actually speeding up again. You can see it all over Spotify. And we're moving really fast, handling code from more and more teams every week, and having more fun because we actually get to look at a big set of new cool features, stuff that we haven't seen before, like really awesome stuff, and fixing things that we've been wanting to fix for a long time. We finally got SD cards for Samsung Galaxy S3s out working, sort of, but it's working. I mean, finally, we've been wanting to do that for so long. And the thing is, when we hit bumps, the first landing is going to be pretty rough. Scratch our faces, bite the dust, that sort of thing. But the next time, we learn from it, and then we use the bump to fly. Because, that's what this entire company is about, learning from what we do and mistakes. So that's it. That's enough from me. Yeah. Questions?
So how do you segment the bug tracking process across all the various teams? Do you assign just that team, the original coders that built it, to do the due diligence, to investigate, and then they're responsible for pushing the next release ahead of anything else? Or?
Right, so the question was, how do we actually segment or distribute the bugs? Well, I guess reporting of bugs to different teams, probably the app, or all of our apps, I guess also. And that's a good question, of course. It really depends on the context, but normally a bug will come into the container squad or something similar, and we'll see, well, yeah, this has more to do with the artist page or something else or whatever, or it has more to do with radio, and we might send it off to another team. But normally we have a look-see and see what it does. Actually, we don't know that well yet, but we'll probably do something about it when we get to a bigger amount of it. In general, for the product, I guess it goes to the relevant feature squad. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Does your Android app uses the Spotify SDK that you publish?
It uses. Sorry, the question was, does our app use the published Spotify
SDK?
SDK. It does in a way. It uses a version of it. The one that we publish is a limited version of our entire core functionality.
So
right.
your version has more features,
So our version has more features. Yeah, and it does allow us to do some things that aren't really meant for public consumption. Yeah. and it's also nastier to work with.
Not to throw your colleagues under the bus, but do you find that the Android code is typically more stable than the iOS?
Do I find the Android code more stable than iOS? That's a very good question. I'm not sure I can answer it without being biased as hell. Parts of it, yes. Parts of it, no. We have parts that are really horribly unstable, of course, like every software product does. Most of it, I'd say, I don't know the quality of the iOS thing. I don't even use it on an iPhone, so sorry. You in the back, yes.
So, this Dunbar number you mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
So there's this book written a long time ago called The Mythical Man Month
Yeah.
by Fred Brooks. And I'm just curious, have you calibrated how do you measure productivity in this new model?
Right.
You have people,
So I guess the question, if you sum it up, is how do we measure productivity in our company, pretty much?
you write this app, it took you 6 weeks the last time you did it, this time it took you 4.5 weeks with the same manpower, something like that. How do you measure that? And when do you measure it?
So that actually depends on where in Spotify you're working. Okay, sure. I've got to wrap it up this time. No, okay. The question, repeat the question, sorry. So the question is, how do we measure productivity in Spotify? How do we measure how long something takes to develop, whether or not using that many people is useful or not, I guess. I hope I'm summarizing it sort of all right.
Close enough.
Close enough. It depends on where you're working. Some teams measure how many features they get through. Some teams measure how many features they manage to deploy. Some teams measure stories. I'd say that in many cases we go for a gut feeling. If you're feeling slow, then it's probably true. And then you need to do something about it. The Dunbar number is more of a theoretical base for why we decided to go for the tribes. I don't know if I can answer that question really well right now, but we can talk about it later. Okay.
How do you build an app from scratch?
How do you build an app from scratch?
So people who are born instead of from scratch.
Oh wow. There's some really good tutorials over at the developer site that Google has put together for Android. There's even a couple of, if you download their basic stuff, their SDK and stuff like that, there are some skeleton apps that basically are examples that you can run. I'd say that's a pretty good starting point. Then there's a lot of good tutorials on the developer side as well. And otherwise, Googling for Android on Stack Overflow and reading everything you come across is probably a pretty good starting point. But yeah, don't quite know how to answer that question. But it was a good question though. Right. Okay, sir?
As far as your features go, you said that you were able to get it down to about 3-week releases.
Mm-hmm.
Do you try to keep your features synchronous with what the iOS team is releasing? Or are you just more so on, okay, these are what we're kind of with Android, this is what we can do. Like you said, in your time frame, it could be released in this release, but not push it to the next one. Like how rigid do you try to stay on par with the other two?
So pretty much, are we synchronizing the features with the iOS gang?
Or as best you can.
And are we strict about not allowing things that are crap in? We're pretty strict about it. And also, we don't have any, I don't think we have any policy of developing all our features for all our platforms at the same time. Don't know how much I can say about that without going into stuff I shouldn't be talking about.
That's
But-
fine.
yeah, but no, we are not that strict about it. It depends on the situation, of course, like everything else does.
So to follow up to that, are tribes a single platform or are they cross-platform?
Sorry, what's more?
Are tribes single platform things or are they cross-platform?
So our tribe's single platform or cross-platform? It depends on the tribe. The one I'm in covers iOS, Android, I guess the Ford thing, pretty much all of our receivers and stuff like that. And no, they're not single platform. Some of them are, but most of them are not.
So the Ford app, is that considered a totally separate project, or is that just a subset of each iOS and Android tool?
Is the Ford app considered a separate product? I don't really know. You should ask the iOS guys later on. I have no idea.
What's the downside of launching all these feature flags in production and managing them over time? Aren't they just going to build up?
So what's the downside to having a lot of feature flags? Well, yeah, and will they add up over time and become a burden themselves? Yes, of course they will. That's what happens with everything. A good metric or whatever you want, if something has been rolled out to 100% of the population and you're not seeing problems with it anymore, now would be a good time to remove that feature flag, making your code simpler. It's the way, I mean, the same thing as you don't want to support too many versions of a library at the same time either. Pretty much the same logic. Make sure that you clean up your code, but that goes without saying, I guess. Okay, any more questions? Okay, over there.
On the fragment request, why you don't use a receiver instead of a fragment for the ad set?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question. Could you repeat it?
You create a fragment for the ad set
Yeah.
or off. And why you're not using a receiver as a default receiver?
Well, we do have, sorry, the question is why don't we use a receiver instead of using a fragment?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, of course, that we wrap a receiver in the fragment. Now, this is just an example of what you can do.
Oh, okay.
But actually, it's kind of nice. We do this every now and then. The main benefit is, of course, that you can do this once, and then you can use it in the places that needs one in the code, and you don't actually need to unregister it on your own. The backstack or the fragment manager does that on its own. So you don't actually need to handle anything. You write it once, and then all of the lifecycle stuff is handled by itself. When you do broadcast receivers, it's really easy to forget and just not unregister, use the wrong method to unregister, and then everything breaks in runtime. Okay, cool. I think I'm gonna have to wrap up.
Yeah, that's it. If you guys have any other questions, you can see Brian or Michael after. And thank you all for coming. As I said, if you are looking for a job, you can come talk to me. Or if you're just interested in mobile development, you could also come talk to me. But that's pretty much it. So thanks.